Kia ora, ko Smith aho. Nā mai ki te whare, welcome to the House. The first completed week of MP's final 3-week parliamentary sitting block was the December edition of Scrutiny. Louis will explain what that is in just a moment. And in today's programme, we will look at 3 aspects of parliamentary scrutiny. With highlights from his reporting from Tuesday and Thursday, Louis Collins will outline the tussle between showy politics and careful oversight. And then later, I will look at the interlocking problems of scale and attention. But first, Louis.
Kia ora, ko Louis Collins aho. This week, Parliament is in the midst of a twice-yearly event called Scrutiny Week. It's technically a sitting week and MPs are expected to be in Wellington, but the House doesn't sit. There are no debates on legislation and no question time. Instead, ministers and senior officials front up to select committees, where MPs cross-examine them about the performance of the government agencies that sit within their portfolios. The December Scrutiny Week is retrospective. Ministers and officials are asked to account for how the agencies have performed over the past financial year. Most of the headlines coming out of the hearings have been focused on the fiery exchanges between ministers and the opposition. Moments like this.
So when was the funding allocated for that?
Across several budgets. And that is the nature of it.
Which budgets?
Order. We're going to go to our deputy chair,
This
is Mr. Ryan Hamilton. Thank you. I call it.
On the first day of Scrutiny Week this week, the Primary Production Committee was joined by Minister Andrew Hoggard, flanked by officials from MPI. Hoggard answered questions related to his responsibilities of biosecurity, animal welfare and food safety. A range of questioning styles tend to emerge in these hearings. Some MPs stick closely to the purpose of annual review scrutiny, but when the hearing moves on to politically divisive topics or issues with heavy media coverage, the exchanges can turn more into an interrogation, like this line of questioning from the Greens' Steve Abel.
Mr Minister, I've got an image taken from a Taranaki farm a few weeks ago. There's one dead piglet there underneath, which is another image of that if you want to see it up close, but we don't need to. This, would you agree, is not legal under our Animal Welfare Act to have mother pigs in cages like that based on the 2020 High Court finding?
Well, no, the 2020 High Court finding said that, how the rule was put in place was done incorrectly, or the process followed, and obviously that pigs being in a farrowing crate for 33 days did not meet the purposes of the Act. So, not the crate itself. And so that's what we're looking at. How do we minimise that time in the crate to only what's necessary to save as many piglets as possible?
So why do you reject the advice of your National Animal Welfare Advisory Council that the best welfare outcomes for mother pigs and piglets is moving away from farrowing crates?
Well, no, I don't think they said that. The analysis I had was, they could only look at the sows in terms of that. The advice I've got is, like I've said, 14% higher risk of mortality. We've got to make sure that it's not just the sow, it's the piglets as well. You've got to balance everything up. It's not a perfect world in terms of farming. There's a number of things going wrong, happening at the same time, and you've got to come up with a smart balance. Business is going to be less profitable by that amount every year. That was the key thing around, actually, that's what adds on the extra cost to that NAWAC proposal.
Have you prioritised that consideration over the consideration of animal welfare in your responsibility as the Minister of Animal Welfare?
So in terms of the economics, that was the basis for the transition period. In terms of the welfare, that was why we went to minimise the length of time they could spend in the crate to max, and that would give us the best piglet survivability. So the welfare of both sow and piglet.
Scrutiny isn't just a opposition versus government showdown, though. MPs from the government parties also have a chance to ask questions.
Do you think that essentially farmers, including all pig farmers, are intrinsically aware of the health of their animals and that's vitally important to them?
If the animal isn't healthy, they don't produce. I've known that for a long time on my dairy farm. The cow has to be healthy to make milk.
These kind of exchanges can easily digress into a political tit-for-tat, with the discussion wandering away from the intended narrow scope of annual reviews. But what you don't see often covered are the hearings that are much more in line with the original purpose of December Scrutiny Weeks, a detailed examination of how government agencies are actually performing. Some argue that the absence of ministers creates space for a more inquisitive and constructive back and forth, a conversation that's less political theatre and more genuine auditing. And in many cases this week, that's exactly what's happening. The annual review of the Ministry of Justice was one of the committees that had a completely different feel, calmer, more focused and far more granular.
In both this audit and maybe subsequent audits, there has been some comments around your IT control environment and your procurement processes. So keen just for you to give a bit more, the committee a bit more insight into how you have been addressing some of those issues.
There's a fair bit of crossover between the members of the Justice Committee and the MPs who you might call practitioners of the committee stage. One of them is Lawrence Shunan.
Has that number changed or varied? Because I can't actually see a response on that.
So yes, we do track all of those, the disproportionality at all stages through the process. And in terms of remand, there has been a decrease in the number of people on remand at the moment, and the remand rate overall has decreased.
And the proportion of Māori?
The proportion of Māori on remand, I'll just check if I've got that.
Has that increased or decreased?
I think that's increased from memory.
And without the temptation for political tit-for-tat, there's more room for MPs to really test the numbers, like this line of questioning from Labour's Duncan Webb on the government's Retail Crime Advisory Group.
I want to focus on the work of the Ministerial Advisory Group for the Victims of Retail Crime. Is that group within its forecast budget?
Yes.
Is there any concern around the costs that have been incurred by members of that group?
The group is doing its work. They are they're busy and they're producing quite a lot of advice for ministers. As part of that, they're running quite a lot of engagements.
Or what's the audit check when people put claims in for days worked, that the days were worked?
We would take a member's claim for days worked on face value.
Right. It's just, I mean, in terms of the chair, he claimed for 154 days between February and July 25, meaning he worked 5 days a week and 1 or 2 days every weekend and took none of the 6 public holidays in that period. Does that raise any concerns?
Look, I think this is a pretty passionate undertaking for the chair, and it wouldn't surprise me if he did work very long days and hours on it.
Okay. Are you aware of the meeting that was held by the group on 28 February this year?
So while the sound bites extracted from Scrutiny Week are often the moments of hostility, it's these more audibly tedious, methodical hearings that likely tell us far more about how our public entities have been performing. The effectiveness of these sessions in terms of transparency and accountability will depend on the quality of both the questions and the answers.
Kia ora, ko whasmatahu. Parliament's scrutiny weeks always involve a sudden glut of oversight to follow. It's enough to sate even the keenest political junkie. But the apparent feast is but a glimpse of the vast underlying picture. Oversight of government involves a cascade of diminishing attention. First, the basics. Scrutiny Week is a biannual parliamentary event. What's being scrutinised is the government, not just the cabinet, but all of the various aspects and arms of the machinery that they run or fund. The 2 annual scrutiny weeks are different. In June, they focus on plans, and December, it's about outcomes.
Right, first question from Honourable Ginny Anderson.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner. What work has been carried out by police to mitigate the cost pressures and deliver the 500 new police?
Well, we certainly started a year ago with a lot of our cost-saving initiatives. In fact, even...
that, like all of the audio in this piece, is from a multi-hour scrutiny hearing into the performance of the police. The cascade of diminishing attention is not about things being hidden. It's just inevitable. There are nearly 40 government departments, and that's a lot all by itself. And then add in 150 or so core Crown entities and something like 2,500 entities or organisations outside central government, but established by statute and often receiving at least some government funding. That is far too many to be scrutinised by our tiny parliament. In reality, scrutiny of the many government entities occurs internally, by entity boards, by ministers, and crucially, by auditors working for the Office of the Auditor General. Highlights filter through to Parliament via annual reports.
In your annual report, there's been a decline when people are asked, the general public, do you agree that police are effectively responding to serious crime?
Right.
That's dropped in your annual report over the past couple of years.
Right.
Do you think there's a link between that decrease and the fact that there are fewer police per other people per population in New Zealand?
It's interesting. A lot of the feedback that I've had throughout the year, given our emphasis on beat patrols and visibility, is that, in fact...
For these scrutiny weeks, select committees choose who to focus on. The big departments get hearings every year, but the small and inconsequential are very occasionally called upon. This week, by my count, there are reviews of 88 different ministries, agencies and entities, and each of those has been prepared by questionnaires, and then there's been briefings by auditors and so on. The public hearings range from half an hour through to most of a day. 88 is a huge number of hearings in a week, but it pales a little beside 190 core entities, and then the many others. Of course, some of them are overseen by those that are being reviewed, but unless they're doing something very wrong, they're unlikely to feature.
Because a lot of your comments this morning, you've been saying you can't paint 15,000 officers with the same brush.
Yeah.
Systemic bias and racism is not saying every police officer is racist.
Yeah.
It's saying that the structures and the rules, for example, the use of discretion, look at the way that that is used between Pākehā and Māori cannabis possession charges. It is disproportionate. Māori in the last year are now more highly charged with possession of cannabis than Pākehā, despite the fact that we are only 15% of the population and Pākehā are the majority. Yeah. So how does that work out?
Yeah,
how is there such a massive difference in the discharging of discretion, if not systemic racism?
I would want to understand beyond just those high-level statistics, to understand the situations that my staff are dealing with and why that is, you know, what you're explaining there.
The diminishing attention really kicks in at the final hurdle, media coverage. Because how many of those 88 hearings are you likely to read about or hear details on? Realistically, just a handful. There are many fewer journalists, and so the focus is typically on the tried and true, health, education, police, so on, which are always under review. Plus, anything that's been in the news recently, if there's a relevant hearing on offer. Maybe a few dozen stories, which will focus on just a few sentences from only a few hearings into just a sample of the wider apparatus of government. And if you want more, you'll have to go to the source and watch the hearings yourself via the Parliament website. It will only take your entire Christmas holiday. You've been listening to The House. It's a whakarango koe ki te whare. This program is produced with funding from Parliament's Office of the Clerk. Mā te wā.